Salutations, dear viewers. This is George from Ireland, and I'm carrying on my series about Nazi Germany for A-level. And in this video, I will be analysing how the Third Reich set out to change German society and assessing how successful they were in doing that. So I'll carry on where I left off before. Gleichschaltung, the harmonization of society. That's to say that everybody had to be marching to the Nazi drum beat, and anybody who was an open dissenter was going to be purged, was going to be forced out of his or her job, and quite often sent to a concentration camp if they didn't flee abroad. So that all state organs and even non-state organizations, companies and so on, churches, should be supporting Nazism. That was the idea. So the Nazi Party never had as much as 10% the population amongst its membership. They did set up all sorts of groups which were Nazi organizations, but not actually the Nazi Party, for every occupational group you can think of, as in the Nazi Jurists League, as in that's for judges and lawyers, one for students, Nazi Medical Association, so forth. Now, pupils may not be surprised to learn that the profession that had the highest rate of joining a Nazi organization was the teaching profession. 97% of teachers joined the Nazi Teachers League. Now, admittedly, that's because those who don't were quite often sacked, and those who joined earlier on were advantaged, more likely to be promoted. So trades unions have been the backbone of the Socialist Party in Germany, and to some extent the Communist Party. The Nazis were serving the interests of the conservative elite for the first couple of years, who disliked trades unions. In case you don't know what they are, a trades union is a group of people who work in the same sector, such as the railways or factories or catering, whatever it is, and they push for higher wages, shorter working hours, better conditions, things like that. And they negotiate with the employers, and if they're really dissatisfied, they go on strike, they refuse to work, things like that. So employers tended to dislike them because they didn't want to have to pay higher salaries, they didn't want to have to cut hours of work, or they didn't want to have to spend more money making working conditions safer. So the Nazis gave the trades unions what they wanted, which is the 1st of May as a bank holiday, and so the trades unions were pleased with that, and the Nazis took that as an opportunity to ransack the offices of trades unions and close down independent trades unions, replaced it with a German Labour Front run by Dr. Robert Ley, which wasn't really a trades union. There was no right to strike, and it was not pushing for improved conditions for workers. So there were some few small-scale strikes which were illegal as the country returned to economic health. In the early 30s, people were just so afraid of losing their job, they were grateful to have any job, even for miserable wages. Collective bargaining was banned. That's to say you couldn't band together and say, we want to all be paid a bit more, or all have more paid time off, or not to be sacked without good reason. So the Nazis set up courts of honour to arbitrate between labour and capital, and they invariably took the side of the bosses. So this is how they had harmonised the state, to use that euphemism, as if they'd got rid of genuine trades union activity. There was a beauty of labour movement within Nazism meant to improve working conditions, as in better lighting and ventilation and heating and so on of working places, and planting a flower bed outside factories or steelworks, things of that nature. Many workers were simply glad to have a secure job, and wages rose a little. The Nazis were so successful at reducing unemployment, by the time the war broke out, they reckoned they were about 500,000 workers short. Now that was partly owing to men aged 18 to 20 being in the armed forces. So they brought in a new law. Anybody who turned down 2 job offers was to be regarded as indolent, and this work-shy person would be sent to a concentration camp, an asocial, having to wear a black triangle. So asocials were also included alcoholics, homosexuals, and so forth. So when I explained to my friend you could get a black triangle for being alcoholic, homosexual, or work shy, she said, give me 3 black triangles. So some people were like that. It was not so funny at the time if you were sent to one of those concentration camps, and not many people came out of them alive. So They cleared away people who were unpopular, the people of the margins of society, who were just odd, alcoholics, tramps, and so on. And I suppose that was a kind of harmonization. And some bigoted people approved of this. Well, let's look at some of the changes in society that the National Socialists set out to achieve. That was relegating women to the domestic role, saying, church, children, kitchen, that's what women should be doing, parturiate annually, ideally. Increased marriage and birth rate, which obviously touches on the previous point, exclusion of Jewish people from German society, a breakdown in class and denominational barriers, and the regional barriers. Remember, Germany had been 36 states. That was one of the reasons they weren't so keen on monarchies and grand dukes, because they were a symbol of local identity. So, with regard to relegating women to the domestic role and subordinate role, the Nazis were only somewhat successful in that, partly because of the Great Depression, women were more likely to lose their jobs than men, and the Nazis felt that also solved the problem of chronic unemployment, because if married women gave up their jobs, there would be no unemployed men. That was the thinking, which didn't quite work. And women might want to work outside the home, and it's not as though being a housewife doesn't involve any actual work. So they wanted to discourage women from pursuing higher education. They didn't actually ban women going to university. So let me see. They limited women to 10% of all university places, and that was that. So young men couldn't go to university straight away until they completed their military service, unless they'd already done, unless they were doing medicine. So even then, in the Second World War, it went higher than 10%, because they didn't want to completely waste university places, as more men were, virtually all men were off fighting. So more women qualified as doctors under the Nazis than previously, so perhaps they were a bit unsuccessful in that. They might have just simply slowed women's progression in the professions, rather than stop it completely. So the Nazis were happy for women to be teachers, but not to be anything else, not to be architects, engineers, lawyers, anything like that. How about the drive to increase the birth rate? Well, their philo-generative policies, again, met with limited success. People had obviously stopped getting married or stopped having children, not in all cases, just less than before, because of the Great Depression. And as the economy became healthier, people were more willing to wed and procreate. They gave interest-free marriage loans to to couples, writing it off if they had so many children. And again, that was somewhat successful. But it didn't actually help the Third Reich by producing more little soldiers, because we know the first babies born under this scheme would have been born in 1933. By the time the Third Reich came to an end, these children were only 12 years old, so too young to fight or contribute to the war economy. So many people say that the upswing in matrimony and fecundity was chiefly owing to prosperity, and not very much to do with Nazi policies. Anyway, how about the exclusion of the Jewish community from German society? Well, the Nazis did this in several stages. They'd been vilifying the Jewish minority for years, but the removal and murder of Jewish people from Germany, or murdering them abroad, usually they killed them in Poland, that was something they were going to have to work up to, because that would be too shocking for all but the most vicious anti-Semites. They grew bolder and more cruel over time. The Nazis had moved gingerly at first. They were a little bit circumspect. In some cases, bourgeois people were gladdened if they saw their Jewish business rival or professional rival knocked out of competition and given such a person's property when a business was Aryanized. So they did completely achieve that goal. It was obviously a reprehensible goal. The trouble is, it depended which person counts as Jewish. Someone who's half Jewish was regarded as a Jewish person by the Nazis. Someone who's a quarter Jewish, a borderline case. They said if this individual is a member of the Jewish religious community, then yes, he or she is Jewish. But if he's a member of the Christian community, then this person is not Jewish. Those who are 1/8 or less, they were simply regarded as German. Anyway, it's preposterous, and Hitler found out that some army officers had some Jewish ancestry and gave him a racial clean bill of health, saying, well, let's just overlook that, which showed what a nonsense it was. Right, that's enough for the moment.